So Marin Sardy and I met 27 years ago. We were college freshmen in the dorm, and we got on famously. And she was even back then at 18 years old. I mean, smart as a whip, witty, interested in things, curious, loved language, and a skillful master of the English language. And I remember reading something that she wrote and just thinking, "Wow, this is a person with a very special gift." So it was no surprise that she went on to become a successful published author. And when her book came out in 2019, titled "The Edge of Everyday Sketches of Schizophrenia," I just had to read it. And so when I got around to actually reading it, I couldn't put it down. It was mind blowing. Marin grew up in a family where two very close family members had schizophrenia, and this book is a sibling love story. It's a story of a mother and daughter. It's a story about discovering who you really are when you're impacted by other people's mental illness. It's about the system around mental illness, government systems, etc. It's hard to even describe this book because it's so deep and so meaningful. And so to get to talk to a dear and old friend about her life that she's now expressed through this incredible, insightful, heartfelt, brilliant, and dare I say entertaining book, it was a very, very special opportunity. And I was so grateful that she did it. So I hope you enjoy this conversation as much as I did. Marin Sardy, author of The Edge of Everyday Sketches of Schizophrenia. Wow. So, this isn't an interview, so we're just going to kind of hang out together, and it just happens to have been recorded.
All right, that sounds fantastic. I'm really looking forward to this.
Yeah, well, so why? I mean, obviously, you and I have a great relationship and have known each other for 27 years.
Oh my God! Wow, that's a big number. Yeah. So to answer why, I've been interviewed on the radio for this. I have been on one podcast, but I have never had the opportunity. I've been interviewed for like print, but I've never had the opportunity to really do kind of a official discussion of my book with somebody who knows me. And also, you're just a lot of fun to talk to.
Oh man, you're raising the stakes now. I mean, now I gotta come up. Hang on, I gotta come up with a comedy routine. It's fun to. It's such a an intimate book, and it's such a personal book, and it's one of the things I wanted to ask you about was just, it really. The Edge of Everyday Sketches of Schizophrenia. I mean, that's not exactly a title that, it's like, oh, there's some light reading for Saturday afternoon,
Yeah, right. It's not really a beach read. Yeah.
Yeah, right? Exactly. By the way, I was wondering how you, whenever I'm not an author per se, like I don't write books, but I've written a fair number of things. And usually the title comes at the end for me. And I was just wondering how that came about for you.
Yeah, sure. I mean, there's kind of a saga actually. So yeah. I had a working title, which was the title of one of the chapters in the book. And that was the title that I sold it to the publisher under. But when you sell a book, whatever title you've chosen, it's sort of understood that can be changed, Yeah. So it was near the end of the process, actually. We were in the editing stages, and my editor came to me and said, well, we've talked about the book here at the publishing house, and we think we think that this title is a little too, what did she say? I think academic is what she said. And she said, and we're wondering if you can maybe come up with something a little more evocative, She said, we just don't think this title sort of reflects what's inside the book quite clearly enough. And so I said, sure, I can come up with a more evocative title. And then promptly kind of had a crisis of what on earth is the title going to be. I spent days, I made a long list of like potential ideas. And I was like sending it out to my friends and saying, which of these titles do you like best? But
Oh my
there was like
God.
no single title that really felt like that's it. I was like
Right.
waiting for that feeling of that's the one. And I spent like days on this, and I'm talking like dozens of titles, like
Yeah.
phrases from the book, that I pulled out, and I just had nothing. And I was going back and forth with my editor about it, and just she wasn't really happy with any of them. And then finally, in desperation, Will had not yet read the entire manuscript cover to cover. He had read most of the
Right.
pieces, but particularly not the new material.
Okay.
The stuff like which was the stuff that's like closer to the end. And so I said, Will, please read the book and just tell me, come up with something for me. Tell me any ideas that you get out of there that would work. And so he spent a couple days reading the book, and he came to me one morning, and he said like 3 different titles. And one of them was The Edge of Every Day. And that's a phrase that appears very late in the book. I think it's on like the second to last page.
Yeah.
But the way it appears in the book, it's in a different context. So it has a different connotation. It has a very different connotation when you take it out of context. And I think that's why it didn't occur to me. But he saw it, and I thought, that's it. Because then all of a sudden we had this suggestion of this idea that, the danger, the threat that was always kind of hovering in the background throughout the story that I was telling. Yeah.
Right. And given the context of the book and the nature of the book, a title that could have multiple meanings is perfect.
Yeah, exactly. I loved that about it too, because when it appears in the book, it has a more positive connotation. Yeah. So there's really both sides of it there.
Oh, totally. Which is, I mean, the whole book is just rife with that kind of stuff. It's like, one of the things that hit me, I think I told you this before we got on the podcast a few weeks ago, but I remember putting the book down. Well, I have it on my iPad. I'm going to get the paper version eventually, because this is one of those books that I think I want to have in paper as well. But I remember I put it down and I picked it up the next day, or no, it was that same day. And I had clearly, because it's a digital thing, it's like, oh, this is where you stopped. Mm-hmm. And I started reading, and I was like, no, I already read this. And it literally took me like 10 minutes of going back, and then I figured out, no, I hadn't read it. And in fact, it was a little bit different, but the way that you wrote it was so brilliant that I was actually kind of lost for a second.
The way it like loops back on itself and touches back
on
things that I've mentioned before. Yeah. Yeah. Well, I think that's like a really cool experience that you had. I mean, I love when people have unusual experiences with books, and to hear that you had one like that with mine is really fantastic. And I mean, it was absolutely necessary for me to write this book in a way that was not linear and that was not straightforward, because there was nothing about the way I experienced it that was linear or straightforward.
No, clearly not. How did you come up? Because the other really cool device that you used was to have these kind of, nothing was random in this book, but the vignettes that you put in.
Particularly at the beginning?
Particularly at the beginning, but it went, I mean, maybe I'm misremembering, as it were, but throughout the book, there were these sections where it was just like, here's a little vignette, here's a little fragment of a thought. Yeah. And they didn't necessarily connect, obviously. Some of them are more abstract than others. Uh-huh. They were kind of reflections, abstract, almost dreamlike sometimes.
So
how did you come up with that device? That was brilliant. I mean, for me, it was like having a scratch and sniff book. Like, this is a 4-dimensional book. I think of a book as like concepts that I read, right? This book made my mind like warp in ways that I never expected it to.
Well, thank you. That's awesome. But it really emerged organically. Like, I didn't sit down and be like, think this out. It was like, so much of the decisions that I made emerged out of the process and out of the
Uh-huh.
struggle of trying to figure out how to communicate what I needed to communicate about schizophrenia and
Yeah.
about loving people who live with psychosis. And those vignettes, I think for me, because my experience with schizophrenia spanned decades, it's been in my life now for 35 years. So I had all these different pieces of ideas about it. I had these different things I wanted to say about it, but they grew out of direct experience from different times in my life,
Mm-hmm.
in which I had different relationships to it. So it wasn't particularly coherent, and yet the individual pieces I could say, no, this piece, I can bring this together here and make this really coherent for you in this little gem sort of a
Right.
fragment.
Right.
And that's what I got. That's what I got to offer. I mean, it's very reflective of how I lived it, and that was hugely important to me.
Wow. Well, what a life. I mean, there's a lot there. And I was in preparing to have this conversation with you. I didn't go back and reread the book. I did go back over some notes that I took, and tried to sort them out in
Uh-huh.
categories, which was sort of interesting.
Uh-huh.
Um, and one of the things that really, so first of all, just on the sort of the theme of the book, I ended up concluding that this was not a book about schizophrenia in the sense that I'm going to write a book about schizophrenia. That it was
Right.
a book about love, and it was a book about, in particular, sibling relationships, even more than the daughter. The family dynamic's huge. There's you as the daughter to both your mother and your father, separate, completely,
Right.
in many ways, completely separate
Yeah. Yeah.
stories, right?
Uh-huh. Right.
But ultimately, for me, and maybe this will change, but it was a love story between a brother and sister, and a sister and sister. And I
Yeah.
wanted to ask you about both of those things because in the beginning of the book, it says for Adrian. And so
Mm-hmm.
I wanted to ask you about that. What went into that decision? I kind of, it touched my heart when I read that, and I actually saw it again when I went back to the book, and I was moved by that. But talk about Adrian and where she fits in for you on this.
Yeah, well, I think that, so I will say, like, when the time, I hadn't put much thought into dedicating the book to somebody if I was going to, if so, who. But when the time came, which was, after the book was written, we were editing it. And when the time came, it was one of those things where I just had a moment of like, there is only one person that there's just this person I have to with her. And um there's a lot of history there. My sister, Adrian, experienced it alongside me more than anyone else in the world. From the beginning with my mother through dealing with my brother and trying to help him, she was always the person I could talk to about it, who
Yeah.
I could listen to. We really we operated as a team in different ways throughout our lives. I mean, there was certainly, as teenagers, it was sort of a spastic and dysfunctional team, but I think there was a really core trust and respect that we always had for each other, and a mutual understanding of like, you're the other person who gets what I've lived through.
Mm-hmm.
And it's kind of impossible to overstate how much Adrian has helped me
Mm-hmm.
deal with all of this over the years. And I hope she would say the same of me. But like, from my experience,
Right.
just I can't imagine having gone through it without her. And so I felt like I'm the writer, I'm the one who's telling the story. And I wanted it to be in part for her,
Mm.
because I think she's glad that the story has been told. And I think that she needed it to be told in a certain way. And I think I was able to do that. And so this was something, something I could give her.
Wow. What a gift. What a gift.
Yeah, right.
I mean, the thing is, there's no one like a sibling.
true.
especially if they're close enough in age. How far
Yeah,
off are you in age? I
we're
forgot.
close.
You're pretty
Adrian and I,
close, aren't you?
we
Yeah.
were 2 grades apart, but less than 2 years apart. And then Tom was only
Yeah.
1 year younger than her.
Yeah.
So
So you're all close.
yeah, yeah. And then our older sister was only about a
And
year and
then
a half older than me.
right.
So my mom really, popped us
She was
out
busy. She
one
was
after the other.
she was busy.
Yeah. Um,
Yeah.
which has
Yeah.
been wonderful. But I think too, with siblings, I kind of think there's fundamentally two kinds of sibling relationships.
Mm-hmm.
There's the sibling relationships that are fundamentally trusting,
Mm-hmm.
and there are ones that are fundamentally untrusting.
Mm.
And I've been incredibly fortunate that both with Adrian and with Tom, our relationship were always fundamentally trusting. And I
Yeah.
think a lot of that was because we were in it together, in sorting this out, living with my mom, and taking care of each other in that way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, that's another thing. I mean, it so I can't believe that you pulled off this is a book like no other book I've ever read. I mean, I kept thinking about what is this? And ultimately I came down, okay, it's a love story about about your brother. And your mother plays a key role in it because schizophrenia runs through the whole spine of it.
Mm-hmm.
And of course it's something they shared. Um, they share still, and forever. um, but it's also a memoir. It has an epic quality because it goes over so
Mm-hmm.
much time. I mean, just
Mm-hmm.
the time of it, I was like, I'm
Yeah.
not an animal. I was like, this is some Lawrence of Arabia shit right here. I mean, we're in the fucking desert, losing our mind. I mean,
Right.
literally. I want to read something to you and just get you to comment on it. Mental illness and madness are not the same. The distinction is important because mental illness is not contagious, but madness often is. Talk about that. I just love that.
Thank you.
That's so amazing. But talk about what that means.
I mean, so much of my process of writing this book was trying to articulate the things that I had understood and witnessed and experienced on some kind of unconscious way, trying to put them into words because there's such a dearth in our culture of talking about mental illness,
Mm-hmm.
talking about psychosis in particularly, what it is, how it affects people, how it shapes lives and relationships. And I had lived all this stuff that I did not have words for.
Right.
So it was really important to me. There were moments when I was writing and something came out and I was like, this is a key to this puzzle for me. This is one of the things I've been needing to say because I felt it inside myself, but I never could form it into language. And that's such a powerful thing when you finally are able to put something into words that you've lived, but
Mm.
that you've tried to communicate to others.
Mm.
And I was thinking, that's in a part when I'm talking in particular about like after my parents were divorced and I lived half the time at my dad's house and half the time at my mom's house. And the difficulty was not just about the difficulty of having a mother who was in the grip of psychosis. It was also the difficulty of my father being left with 4 children that he was suddenly a single parent to in a lot of ways.
Mm-hmm.
And also, he was deeply traumatized by what had happened to her.
Mm-hmm.
And he was angry at what life had delivered to him, understandably so. And so there's all these layers that, the ripple effects
Yeah.
when one person, has a serious illness like this, the way it changed all of us, the way, as kids, we were acting it out, as they say, we were acting out. I think, my dad, you could say he was acting out.
Yeah.
And like, what is that? It was another level. Somehow for me, it was very clear that there was a parallel there on some level, but
Mm-hmm.
that it was really not the same thing. And I think one of the major ironies of my life within this family has always been that my mom is like this like sweet and like calm person. She's a good listener, but she's the one who's severely mentally ill. And my dad, who is like, you know, a healthy, strong
Yeah.
man, could be just like impossible to deal with.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I wanted to get at that. What was that? What's that about? You know? Yeah.
Which is interesting because you didn't really get into that deeply. Like you touched on it, that it was
Mhm.
there. But I almost feel like that would have been too much if you went into that even more deeply.
Yeah, I think maybe it would have. I think I had a few reasons for not going into that too deeply. I think maybe I thought it would be getting me too off track. I wanted to keep
Right.
it. There's so much in my life, so many different facets of my life. I wanted to
Right.
keep it as focused, you know, somewhat at least on, you know, the schizophrenia element specifically. I also feel like that's a different journey for me to like go deeply into my relationship with my dad.
Yeah.
It's about different things than my relationship
Yes.
with my mom and my brother were. And so that would have it's like, well, if I were to do that, it'd be a separate book. But I don't feel the need to write that book.
But you're not going to write that book. No,
Yeah, yeah.
that's pretty clear. Yeah, that's something. It, it it that relationship with your father, actually, that father issues. I mean, who doesn't have them, right? Um, I highlighted a few things, and I did want to briefly talk to you about this because it says, "For what my father did offer, safety, optimism, directness, I'm immensely grateful."
Yeah.
Um, and this is why it is painful to acknowledge that it wasn't enough.
Yeah.
It wasn't enough to be shown that life can be orderly, but to be taught no language with which to articulate chaos.
I mean, that's the book, isn't it? Is me finding the language
Totally.
to articulate chaos. Yeah.
Yes. How do I
Yeah.
make sense of this?
Yeah. And I mean, my dad's worldview, it's very sort of the old school man's man, Western culture kind of attitude
Yeah.
of just you if things don't fit within your view, you just shut them out. And that just did not work for me. I just
Yeah.
couldn't do that, you know?
Yeah. Oh, I mean, the next line to be given stability, but not to be allowed to express the costs of loss.
Yeah. Yeah. It's
Yeah.
it's very
These
true.
things, they come out. It's not something you can actually stuff. I mean, it's going to come out one way or the other. So it was pretty clear that you figured out a way to do that. But I'm wondering how was it to write this book and know that he was going to read that? Obviously, you knew he was going to have an
Yeah.
ability to read it.
Um, it definitely, I will say about my dad, he very much is of the ilk of everyone can have their opinion. And I could say my truth in my book and that was going to be fine. And I always knew that. But at the
mm,
same time, we disagree on a lot of things in ways that have often been contentious. I think I felt that I put a pressure on myself, which I think was reasonable to do, that I felt that I needed to, if I was going to put my dad on the page, I needed to be fair. You know, if I was going to show the ways that I had had difficulty with him, I needed to do it in a way that wasn't just an attack, that wasn't just,
hmm
um, you know, resentful. I really needed to do it in a way that was going to be useful to the story and genuinely fair to the difficulty of his position. And so I was very careful throughout the book. I felt like that was always in my mind when I was thinking about him more than anyone else. I mean, and you know, I had to write quite a lot about him in the chapters about my brother and my brother's
Yeah.
homelessness because my
Right.
dad was the central figure in that of trying to help my brother.
Right.
Um, and I felt bad about that because I knew that my dad would rather just like not be talked about in the book, you know, like he's a private person.
Sure.
And while he was completely like in terms of like respecting my right to say what I need to say, I knew that he would have preferred to just
Yeah.
not have a book written about him, you know what I mean? And so, and I still feel bad about that. But at the same time, at some point, I realized there was absolutely no way to tell my story of my experience with this without
Yes.
telling some of his.
Yes.
So that was kind of the deal I made with myself was,
Yeah.
do it because it's necessary, but do it well, basically.
I kept thinking about how if I were in your shoes, I would be terrified to write, in some ways, terrified to write that truth. Um, but as the reader, easy for me to say, right? I'm the reader. But as the reader, I was like, yeah, but you know what? I don't find myself judging him harshly. Like I don't, because who are you to say if you were the father? Like we all have a different role and a different orientation towards this, and you kind of, I don't know, I felt a lot of compassion for him even as I was acknowledging through your writing the relationship issues that obviously come up when you've got a son and a brother who's um, just on a downward spiral with schizophrenia, and
Yeah.
it just, who's young. I mean, just
Yeah.
all the
Yeah.
all the
Yes,
stuff
you
that
can
came up with
imagine
that.
the pressure that we all felt played
Yeah.
out in our relationship. But I feel an enormous amount of compassion towards my dad, and I always did,
Yeah.
even when we were disagreeing, even when I was mad at him, even when I didn't want to talk to him.
Right.
I and I just think one thing I've learned about writing nonfiction, about writing about people is that the way you see those people will come through in your writing. The way you feel about them will come through.
Uh,
And it's like, well, so I was writing about my challenges with my dad, but I feel the deep compassion. And so I could just trust that that was going to come through.
I think it did.
Yeah.
I think it totally did. That was one of the most amazing aspects of this book to me, because it would have been the hardest thing to thread in a
Yeah.
way that was honest and compassionate, but
Yeah.
honest.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The other thing these are just fragments. Sorry, I've got fragments of ideas, which I think is
Great. It's a
consistent with the whole thing.
fragments of text, fragments of
Fragments of
ideas.
ideas. You to go back to the mental illness and madness thing.
Mhm.
You're distinguishing between mental illness and madness, but I think that's also saying that if you're around mentally ill people a lot, you can go mad. Like it
Yeah.
drives you to madness. There's a definite crossover. There's a connection between the two.
Absolutely. It's incredibly difficult to live with somebody who is psychotic, without medication, because it's so unpredictable, because there's just no boundaries that you can rely on about where this is going to go or what's
Right.
going to happen next. And that's not 100% true. Like after 30 years with my mom, being as she is, I find her pretty predictable actually, but certainly not when it first happened. It was just like all the rules of my life completely got upended. So I think one of the things that is most, you might say, crazy making about it
Mm.
is this throwing open of possibility, of making possible scenarios for your life that you never thought were going to happen before, and
Mm.
that sense of disorientation and real panic that comes with that. And
Mm.
fear, it's really fear. Fear for the person, fear of the future, fear for yourself, not necessarily. I never had any fears that, like, people often connect mental illness with violence. I never had any fears of violence toward me, because of mental illness, but my fears were more existential and they were certainly emotional. As a teenager, I didn't have an adult helping me learn how to mature into an adult. You know what I mean?
I was that you stole another theme that I was going to ask you about. Yeah.
um,
I mean, this really throws your developmental process into a,
oh, way off.
like,
Oh yeah,
way off.
yeah, yeah. And I
Yeah.
mean, I think I still am trying to understand exactly what happened there, but I think it really detached me from the world around me on a deep level. I was very much sort of a silent observer of my world in a lot of ways. It created in me a feeling of helplessness about a lot of things. And and a sense that I couldn't connect with other people. And I think that a lot of that was because in our culture we don't talk about it, and I had no way to talk about it. I never learned how to integrate that aspect of my life into the rest of my life, so my life really got split apart in this, from this internal and external. And I eventually did learn to be, you knew me, I was even at 18, I was a very high functioning, successful in the external world kind of
Right.
girl.
Right.
But then I had this whole piece of me that I couldn't connect it to that. I couldn't deal with it. And that's when, of course, it really started catching up with me. This probably is not a surprise to you, but it played out in my dysfunctional relationships with men.
No, no, I can't imagine that having any relationship. Yeah.
And I think it was when I was a young adult and realizing that I didn't seem to be able to do like a relationship in the way that like my friends somehow managed and seemed to make it look easy. And yet for me, it was like utterly beyond me. And I think I
Yeah.
was just so cut off from myself on some level.
Oh, yeah. I mean, the way the human mind is going to figure out how to cope,
Right.
it has to. It has to build
It
up
has to.
walls and
Yeah.
almost a mythology about yourself
Sure.
to
Oh,
cope
that's
and cut off your heart a little bit.
and that it worked. It got me through
Yeah.
my teenage years,
Yeah.
it worked. And then eventually I started running into enough problems that I thought, well, this isn't working anymore, I should try
Yeah.
to find another way.
Hey, it could have been. You could have ended up, a severe drug addict,
I know.
or
I think it's kind of.
alcoholic or
I don't
something.
know. I don't know why I didn't take any terrible paths. I think. I mean, I think that's just my core personality. Maybe I'm just lucky that there was something inside me that was
Yeah.
always like, "Oh, that's a bad idea. Like, don't do
Yeah.
that."
Yeah.
I didn't want to do bad ideas. Basically,
Yeah.
like I just.
Yeah. 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 Yeah.
And I think that's just. I have no explanation for it. I'm just grateful to my younger self for having a certain kind of head on her shoulders.
Well, you always had an incredible head on your shoulder. I'm curious. Do you think you would be an author if this hadn't been your?
That
I
is such a
really
good
wonder
question.
about
I
this.
have wondered about that. I think the answer might be yes, but I am certain that I would be a very different kind of author than I am.
Yeah.
I think I would write be someone who wrote very different things in a very different way. What that is, I have absolutely no idea. Um,
Slutty romance novels, obviously. Come on. Who are we kidding? Um, no, I mean you have a gift for writing. That's for sure. You always have. But um, I there was another aspect of this book. It was vulnerable. It had an epic quality. I mean, this has everything. This has sex. It has drugs. It has tycoon grandparents, world leaders. I mean, I didn't think Gaddafi. Okay, I never thought that Muammar Gaddafi
I know.
would end up.
I know. Yeah.
And I'll just, if anyone hasn't read the book, if they listen to this and they're like, "How does Muammar?" Just that's the hook.
Like, yeah,
Okay.
we shouldn't say anything. There's no way to explain it.
Okay.
You just have to read it.
There's hot young women, yachts, and Muammar Gaddafi and arms dealers. Okay, so all I'm going to say is if you thought that those do not relate to a story about love and schizophrenia, you're wrong. Because somehow Marin Sardy figured out a way to include all of that. But the funny thing is, it's all part of your life. I mean,
Yeah, it's just my life.
uh,
Yeah.
yeah. I mean, that's
It's
just
something.
nuts.
I feel like I was just born to be a memoirist. I mean, not only
Right.
do I like as internally, I'm just a writer by nature, but then I just lived this life that was just like asking to be turned into a memoir. So
So,
yeah.
what's your life purpose? Oh, sit down. Let me tell you.
It's funny too. It took me a long time to even register how unusual my life is, how unusual my family was. Like,
Well, yeah, it was normal.
aside
It's
from the
normal.
mental illness, I understand,
Yeah.
my mom is mentally ill, so that was the thing that made us different. But like all these other aspects of my life, I was probably 30 before it really sunk into me like this is not normal. Like this everything about my life is like weirdly spectacular on some level. Like not
Mm-hmm.
just me, like my grandparents, my dad, like all of it. And it's like I have no idea like how this happened. It's just what you're born into. So you just work with what you got. Yeah.
Said every Trump child. So, okay, this is a little respite from that. Although I must say, and I don't want to get into a political discussion per se, but the madness, mental illness, gaslighting stuff that goes on
Hmm.
really did remind me of what we're going through right now. And as a society, the fatigue and trauma of being gaslit constantly.
Yes.
And I wondered how you, I mean, you're a very, very bright person. You're very switched on. You're very aware of a lot of nuanced things. And you've also been through this kind of healing journey, which I remember the book, writing the book was a major like milestone
Definitely.
for your healing journey. And then we have all of this craziness and the gaslighting. I mean, just the gaslighting alone, it feels like mental illness and madness colliding to me on a societal level. Like, how has that affected? How have you coped? Do you think you've coped better or worse? Probably better, I would think. Yeah.
Um, Maybe better. I think I cope different, honestly.
Yeah.
I will say I think having experienced that at a young age, I think it made me streetwise in a way, much younger than most of my, peers. I think I had to learn how to see through people. I mean, and I was trying to see through my mother, who her intentions were good. She didn't mean to be messing me up in this way, but I had to learn how to read what she was telling me, to glean what aspect of this is something I can take as truth, and what aspect of this is I need to just flat out not believe. So I think that's a skill that you can learn, and I think I learned it young. So I think that's part of, like I was mentioning, the
Mm-hmm.
good head on my shoulders as a young adult. I think that was part of it. I think I was better than a lot of people at not falling for bullshit.
Well,
um,
because you are on guard.
yeah, yeah, and so of course it's exhausting and it's super taxing.
And you wrote a lot. You wrote a lot of this stuff down just to stay grounded. I mean, I found
Yeah,
that really fascinating.
yeah,
Like,
and I think, I mean, there's always the core of the gaslighting for me was
mm-hmm,
always this thing of like, did what I experienced even real? There is was a fundamental doubt about,
yeah,
I talk about in the chapter about the eggs, about how I witnessed all these things, but everyone was telling me that didn't really happen to me. And so I had this fundamental core of doubt about that, but I also had a skill at spotting bullshit everywhere else.
mm-hmm,
So I really needed to get to the core of it, but at the same time, I had been strengthened in some way. That said, I think I have a really low tolerance for chaos in general, much lower than most people, because I've just had too much in my life and I get really overwhelmed by it and I have to just shut it out. And what I have done with politics in the last 4 years, I've largely just shut it out. I read the headlines, I know the highlights, I know the gist of what's happening and when, but I don't really engage with it. And I feel really awful about that on some level because democracy requires engagement. But like, that's how I take care of myself.
yeah.
Because I know it's beyond the limit of what I can cope with, because I've been beyond the limit of what I can cope with, and I don't want to go back there. So
That makes a lot
that
of sense.
that's a big piece of it. Yeah.
That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, what do you do now that you didn't do before to like take care of your mental health and your spiritual health, if you will?
Um, I mean, I think becoming connected with other people on the deeper level that I had been cut off from was probably the biggest single thing. And so I rely on my relationships to do something for me that I never had when I was
Mm-hmm.
young. And so my relationship with my sister Adrienne is one of those really nurturing relationships. My husband, he knows everything. I've told him everything. And I
Mm-hmm.
wanted, if I was going to have a partnership, that was something I knew was going to be necessary. I was going to need to be able to talk about all of it and have it be heard. And I found that. And I just have these wonderful lifelong friends such as you who
Yeah.
are awesome people who are just enriching in many ways. So I think that's certainly the number one thing. That's certainly the number one thing. And then there's a lot of small stuff. There's a lot of the more obvious stuff, you know. I
Yeah.
do yoga. I love my
Yeah.
dog. I
Yeah.
take walks, you know, but all of those kind of pale in comparison to this.
Oh,
Yeah.
the audio cut out there for a second. That's okay.
Oh.
Um, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I wanted to ask you, there were a few, so this was really interesting. How much research did you do? Because you brought up like AI, and then you got into some like, neuroscience, AI. Oh, okay. You're picking up piles and reams of binders and papers. Wow.
So that's two giant binders full of scientific journal articles, plus hundreds of pages of notes and commentary. And then I can direct you over here to my mental illness bookshelf, which contains dozens of volumes of um, books written by scientists, books written by individuals, memoirs, books written by therapists. I read everything I could find about schizophrenia.
Wow.
And I did it because I wanted to understand it. I wanted to understand it well enough to say something that hadn't already been said. I wanted to figure out which pieces of the story that I know were not reflected in culture. I wanted
see.
to
Okay.
find the gap that I could fill.
Right.
But I also was searching for words. I wanted to articulate the things that I had seen, and you can't do that in a vacuum. Language doesn't exist in a vacuum. Ideas don't exist in a vacuum. I needed to know other people's ideas in order to bounce that off what I had seen so that I could begin to interpret my own experiences. So, years of
I
research.
don't I don't think I don't think I've used a dictionary as much when reading a book as since reading de Tocqueville the first time. You know, I was I was like,
At
well,
the
there's
honors
a
college.
at the honors college. Little This segment is brought to you by the Clark Honors College at the University of Oregon. Go Ducks! All right, back to the show. Um, yeah, so a great college, by the way, for anyone thinking about.
Fantastic.
And it's only gotten better over the years, from what I understand. Um, but there was just a lot of like, I guess I didn't expect so much rigor in terms of the ancillary topics. Like you drill down a little bit into, like, for example, you brought up AI and stateless conversations,
Mm-hmm.
which was sort of an interesting. Could talk a little bit about what you learned about that topic, and it talks about modes of communicating that are stateless. Stateless conversations proceed only from the last thing the speaker said. Talk a little bit more about that and what you learned about that. That was
Sure.
fascinating to me.
Well, I mean, again, this was me sort of pursuing a feeling that I had had a certain kind of experience that I was looking for the words for. And I had happened upon an article about AI that I just saw a parallel there. I just thought, I can use this as a way to get at what I experienced. And the basic connection is that the idea that in human conversation, when humans are fighting and arguing, the way an argument can just go off the rails. And what's happening is that the people aren't listening to each other, really. They're not listening to what each other are saying. They're just reacting to the last thing that was said. So it can
Mm-hmm.
just spiral out of control. And I read about this early AI event in which a man got in a fight with a computer that he didn't know was a computer. He said something and the computer shot back an insult, and it set
Yeah.
him off. And so they just spent 2 hours basically insulting each other. And I mean, this is hilarious, but also deeply fascinating to me. Like, what is this phenomenon? And I just felt there was a connection there with something I was trying to talk about in my own life. And so I was just like, I wanted to use it.
Yeah.
And the way it being a computer just makes it so clear that this isn't there's nothing soulful about this kind of conversation. It's just like animal brain, and that's a lot of the madness that I was talking about,
Yeah.
as opposed to mental illness, and the way that fear, kind of brings the animal brain nature that we have to the surface. And like so much of my challenge, my struggle in my life is to get a handle on that, right? Is to be in charge of that rather than just
Right.
being hurled around by it. And so, I mean, that was just, I think the book is filled with what I call momentary fascinations. You know
Hmm.
me, Matt, I'm a nerd. I'm just a nerd, right?
Yeah.
And I just thought this is so cool and interesting. I want to learn a bunch about it. I spent like, weeks just like reading and thinking about this. And then I moved on to the next momentary fascination. So yeah.
I just thought it would. These were like chocolate truffles just strewn throughout. It was like, oh well, thank you for that. I mean, as if you hadn't had enough to deal with. Then you went and did this research for us and delivered a connection between the issues you're struggling with in AI and this concept of stateless conversations, which again is very tied to a lot of stuff going on right now out in the public sphere.
Mhm.
And it brought up for me the need to double down on educating people about critical thinking and how to
Absolutely.
stay rooted in what the point is and not get lost on the last thing that's said, which
Yeah.
is, that's a hoax, and
Right.
then you've just been totally intellectually, screwed over if you're not rooted in what the real point is. And
Right.
there's just not enough of that in the public sphere.
And the internet is never rooted in the real point. Yeah, I mean,
No.
I feel like when I wrote that 10 years
Right.
ago, it's even more relevant now than it was at the time. At the time I was
That's
thinking
true.
about the internet and the way things happen on the internet, but like it has become our reality to such a greater degree even since I wrote it. Yeah.
Yeah. Unfortunately, it is. It's almost, yeah. I started seeing social media even more um, in a different way, which was that it's all about the last thing that somebody tweeted or that's
Yeah.
on the feed,
Yeah.
and so we're feeding off of fragments that are not complete thoughts,
Yeah.
often completely false, based on false premises,
Yeah.
etc. So yeah. Um, I'm just wondering how you're talking about the need to control as a way of control your thinking, control your environment, control your relationships, just control as a way of being safe
Hmm.
from the effect of mental illness that gets born out in a sense of madness. Right?
Hmm.
Um, so how do you I mean, when do you feel the most free?
Oh, that's a wonderful question. When do I feel the most free? I mean, I think it's when I'm having fun with my friends. Um, I think that I generally, the control thing can be healthy, it can be unhealthy. For me, the way that I've found that works for me that I think is healthy is that I keep my life simple, because there's fewer things that then have the potential to get out of control. Um, and that gives me quite a lot of freedom, I think. But also, I think it helps me to get outside my head. And I think that's what, other people do. Other people pull me outside of my own head enough that I can experience the moment that I'm in. Um, and when I think of the times, what does it mean to be happy to me? When are times when I felt happy? All my happiest memories are enjoying a moment with somebody else.
Yeah, that
Yeah.
makes a lot of sense. It's connection.
Yeah, it is connection, and connection, a positive kind of connection. The
Yeah.
kind of connection that you can have with wonderful people in the wonderful relationships that I've had. The sort of joy that comes from sharing something beautiful.
Right.
Whether it's a joke or a sunset or anything.
Wow. Um, Speaking of laughter and bright colors,
I think I know where this is going.
do you? I don't
Well,
know.
we'll see if I'm right.
I don't know. I can be accused of being a little bit mad at times. So Halloween. Do you still celebrate Halloween?
I didn't know that was where this was going.
Aha.
You know, it depends on where I am. In fact, I have celebrated Halloween very sporadically. But I think as you know, I was living in Tucson. I didn't have a great community there. I had a hard time, meeting people I connected with there. And so I didn't have people to do Halloween with. But in fact, now we just moved back to Santa Fe, and I have friends who are super into Halloween.
Oh my
So
God,
I've
of
been getting
course.
all excited about Halloween this year.
Because
But
I was
really, I love
thinking,
it.
I think the reason why some people pick up drugs, alcohol, it could be sex addiction. I mean, any number of a myriad, food addiction. I've known of people who run in an addictive
Oh,
way,
yeah, absolutely.
you know,
Hmm.
and it's like because it's often um, linked in some way to trauma, and the only time that you feel free from that trauma is when you are in that addiction.
Doing that thing. Yeah.
Um, Now, I'm not bringing up addiction because I think you're addicted to Halloween or whatever. I'm just thinking you didn't go down that road. Thank goodness. There's a scene in the book involving Halloween,
Yeah.
and there's a lot of scenes in the book that I remember because you just are just such a great storyteller. I mean, there's Costa Rica, there's yachts in the Mediterranean, there's all this crazy stuff. Was it the Mediterranean? Or
Yes,
was
it
it?
was.
Yeah, it was the Mediterranean. Um, but that scene in particular, I found to be joyful to read because you ended up dressing up as characters that where it had a connection to schizophrenia for you.
Yes. Yeah. I think there's something very healing for me in finding ways to turn my experience with my relationship to schizophrenia into something positive, to express something positive as a result of what I've lived through and what I've witnessed with it. And I do think that Halloween and the way those costumes sort of intersected was very much an example of that. And I mean, that chapter, the purpose it serves to my mind in the book is that it's a turning point for me where I started to open up and I started to be creative in a way that integrated schizophrenia into the rest of my life. It was the beginning of that integration where I could talk about what I ate for lunch and what I'm doing at work, and this is schizophrenia. What happened in schizophrenia
Yeah.
today in my life? That they could all be there together. And Halloween, I think, because of the nature of costuming. I was talking about identity in that chapter, finding my identity partly by trying on other ones, borrowing scraps from other people's identities in order to figure out which ones fit
What
me,
fit?
which ones
Yeah.
belonged to me.
Yeah.
And so I do love Halloween for that reason. And the way it enables us to take things that are terrifying. I mean,
Mm.
ultimately, Halloween's about death, right? Take things that are terrifying and make them fun, make them light, and play with them, right? It takes some of the edge off.
The
The
edge.
edge,
Yes.
yeah.
Speaking of edge. Yeah. Yeah.
So I think that's a very important. I actually do think it's a very important holiday, and it's been important to me in some ways too. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, that's why it kind of stuck out to me. I love how you framed that it was a pivotal moment of kind of growth in a sense.
Yeah.
That was a cool scene. It was a really cool scene.
Thanks.
Yeah.
And then again,
So,
I have friends in that scene. That's a
mm,
scene about the magic of wonderful friends too.
yes.
And
Yes.
just what they were able to give me without even intending to give me anything at all. Just by being themselves, they gave me so much. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I just want to thank you for writing it. And I just can't imagine what it would be like to write this. And I wonder, um, I don't know how to frame this. thought or question or whatever it is, but I just feel like if Tom were reading this with a right mind, like I don't even know if that makes sense, but it's almost like, what's your connection with your brother as a result of writing this book?
Well, I can say a couple things about that. I think that what this book did for me, what in a way it gave me my brother back. When he got sick and then started sliding into homelessness, and there were so many years where I didn't see him and couldn't connect with him in the way I was accustomed to connecting with him. That was such an enormous loss, and I think through all those years, what I felt so much was my pain and my loss and my fear for him, um, that I needed to, once he was gone, to be able to go back into the story and find him in there, find more than my fear and my pain and my loss. To let those things kind of move out of the way so that I could see him again. That I feel like it gave to me, and it made me realize that I had lost sight of him significantly in those years, but at the same time, that was how I survived them. You talk about ways that you cope. I think that was one of the ways that I coped. So it was wonderful to feel like, oh right, this is him. I remember. I know this. Here he is again. So that was great. In terms of what Tom would think reading it, I guess there's obviously no way to know, but just from what I knew of my brother, I think he would think it was cool. I think he would think it was a really cool book. And I don't think he would have a problem with how I wrote it. Yeah.
No, no way.
And I guess I kind of feel like, well, if our situations had been reversed, I would have just been so honored if he had written about me, you know?
Wow.
Yeah.
It's this book is a love story. That's all I can say. And for me, that bond, that sibling bond, and your struggle to hang on to him, and your struggle to reach out to him and try and find whatever was left in him that could maybe connect, feel your love, that going back, traveling back to Alaska repeatedly, um, tracking him down in freezing temperatures and darkness and homeless shelters and things like that. I mean, it's just, you're a tough cookie.
Oh, thanks.
You're so resilient. And you didn't give up. And I feel like the book kind of preserved, I felt like it was like how to hang on to your love of your brother and your relationship with him by writing this, you know?
I think so. I think I needed to sort through the chaos in order to find the part that I wanted to hold on to. And I will say too, I was talking about like all the research I did to kind of find the gaps.
Mm-hmm.
And I think one of the gaps, a big gap that I found in the way people write about psychosis, is that this idea that once somebody um, develops an illness that sort of takes them out of this world, then you just stop caring about them. It's this
Right.
idea, they just sort of get erased. We're not supposed to think about them. We're not supposed to care. We don't love them anymore. And that's just the biggest lie that I think I've come across about mental illness. And so it was intentional to some degree. I wanted to write my love, both for my brother and my mom, into the book because that felt like, it felt political in a way.
Yeah.
Like I wanted to give people permission
Right.
to feel this kind of love towards people who are living with psychosis. I wanted to make people feel like it was okay to care this much about someone with psychosis, because I think there is a feeling in America that you're not supposed to care about them. So that was hugely important for me.
Well, they cease being human resources.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
I mean,
exactly.
one of the terms I absolutely hate is human capital. It just makes me, and my work takes me into that world. And every time I hear, oh, I'm a human capital, I think, oh my God,
Right.
I,
Yeah.
you're dealing with human beings,
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
know,
Yeah.
but we do tend to focus, that's capitalism. And I'm not bashing capitalism per se. There's a lot of good parts about it, but, um, the idea that everything is about generating profit and, is it an expense line? Is it a revenue line? What's its productivity and all that? And so when people don't fit into any of that category,
Yeah.
societally, sometimes I think we don't know what to do with them. So
I think that's really true. I
you know,
mean, and I think we're raised with this idea we're supposed to be able to serve capitalism. We don't
yes,
think of it that way. We don't frame it that way, but
no,
that's what we're doing. And we have, it's hard for
that's right.
people when they can't be productive, right? When you
Well,
can't
then what's
contribute,
their use?
can't serve capitalism. Yeah, exactly.
Right, right.
So yeah, I definitely wanted to kind of get outside of that idea that like that's all we are. Like, of course, a person. So what if you can't serve capitalism? Like who cares? Like it
Right.
doesn't mean there's anything wrong.
Right.
You're
Right.
just being a
Right.
human in a different way. Like
Yeah.
come on.
Yeah. No. Um, I'm just going to read this back to you because I think this sums it up in some ways. Um, this is what you wrote. I think the way you have to look at it, the only way I can deal with it, you have to consider it a story. It's just what happened. It may not be the way you wanted it to be, but it is what happened. It's the way life is.
Yeah. Um, I should point out there, those are actually not my own words. I'm quoting my aunt in that.
Mm.
And that was one of those magic moments. I interviewed everyone in my mother's family to ask them about their memories of her, and their experiences with her illness. And my aunt gave me that gem. I mean, just this beautiful, and it just spoke to what I was doing. So yeah, when she said that to me, I just thought, oh, that's beautiful. Yeah. And just really spoke to me personally as a storyteller,
Oh, yeah.
someone who kind of understands what stories, the role that stories serve in our world, and how important they are in our lives. Just that she could speak to it on that level was just so special. Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
beautiful. I mean, and it's one of 1,000 absolutely beautiful um, words and phrases in this book. You're just so gifted at writing. I can't. So that, which brings me to sort of the finale here, which is when are we getting to read the next thing?
Next.
What are you working on? I know you are.
Yeah,
I'm sure
I
you
am.
are.
I am. I'm working on my second book. I'm pretty early in the process. I don't want to say too much because it could very
That's
easily
okay.
change.
Yeah, yeah.
But I am continuing to write about psychosis. This one is going to be, I'm sort of at this point, how about us that? It's going to be sort of a fusion of memoir and research about another person's life. There's an artist that I admire who had a mental illness. She is now dead, but I think her work was amazing. So I'm writing about her as well as more things from my own life. When I finished The Edge of Every Day, I sat for, like 6 months waiting to see. I didn't know what I was going to do next. And there was a point several months later where it sort of came to the surface, and I thought, I'm not done talking about schizophrenia yet. I have a few more things I still want to say. So this second book, I feel like it's kind of, I don't know, volume two. I feel like it's the
Mm-hmm.
second part of this project that is larger than one book.
Yeah.
And so I'm going to continue to, figure out what these things that I still need to say are. And then I feel like then I'll be like, okay, I'm done with schizophrenia for a while. I think I'll write about something else.
Unicorns and fairies.
Right.
Yes.
Who knows?
Yes. Yes. No, I mean, what's any surprise like the response to the book? I mean, it's been out for a little while now. You've
Mhm.
done some interviews, and it's been out. So yeah, any responses that have surprised you, delighted you?
Um, Not really many big surprises. I think partly because I had been talking publicly about mental illness for several years before I wrote the book. I got connected with activists here in Santa Fe. And so I was accustomed to sort of being public about it and to
Mm-hmm.
talking to people in the community about it. Um, and the kinds of responses I got from the book were often very similar to what I'd been hearing before.
Right.
But it was particularly rewarding to get the kinds of responses that were specific to the book. And there was one in particular. People would sometimes say, "Thank you for articulating things that I've experienced but was never able to put into words." And that was what the book was for. For me, I was just trying to articulate it for myself with the hope that that would help somebody else too. And so that response is the one that I love the most. Absolutely. And now it's in the world. Now some of those things have been said and people can build off that. And we continue to think, we can keep working towards thinking about mental illness in a way that is rich and whole and makes sense. Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah.
That sounds awesome. Well, The Edge of Everyday Sketches of Schizophrenia by Marin Sardy. What an amazing feat. And
Thank you, Matt.
thank you for sharing it with the world and sharing it with me. I I carry it with me now every day. It's amazing the impact it had on me. And I have read voraciously this year. I mean, just voraciously.
Uh-huh.
This stands out from everything I've read, and I have it in my family as well. So my
I know
uncle,
you've mentioned that to me
yeah.
before. Yeah.
So yeah, I just learned so much about it, but I think it at its core is just a lot of love, and I think, boy, if there's anything we need right now, it's that, and I think that it delivers on that really beautifully and in an unexpected way. I think so.
I can say also, actually, that makes me think of one other thing that maybe has been a little bit of a surprise, is that hearing from enough people who say, "Oh, this is in my family," or in a little different form, it's in my family. It's my uncle, it's my son, it's my sister. It's at a certain point, I just thought, everybody knows somebody, everybody loves somebody who deals with this.
Yeah.
Nobody's more than 1 degree removed from it, really.
No.
And it takes many different forms, but so many people can relate to what I describe in the book in a general sense, if not in terms of, the specific things that I discuss. And I think that was a little bit of a surprise. I mean, I knew, people talk about it, it's widespread, it's common. There's this idea that schizophrenia is rare because we never talk about it.
Yeah. Right.
We rarely speak about it is not
Yeah.
the same as it rarely exists,
Said the Victorians about sex. Yes. Ooh.
Yeah. So I mean, I think, and I knew that,
Yeah.
but getting the feedback from people really kind of drove it home for me in a way that it
Yeah.
hadn't really hit me before.
I'm wondering, is there anything that you thought that people would ask you about or talk to you about that they haven't? Sort of an unrequited,
Right.
like inquiry, like, what? I thought you would all be focused on this and
Well, yeah. I mean, I have sort of my geeky things. I got,
oh,
the geeky, like how I wrote this book, how I came up with this idea, how I figured this out. But that's like nerdy writer stuff. So like, I wouldn't expect anyone to ask me those questions. But like, if someday, some fellow writer corners me at a cocktail party and wants to know about it, I think I'll be, super excited.
that was the whole second half because we got into these topics, but I actually wanted to ask you about the mechanics of writing this thing.
Oh yeah. Okay.
Oh yeah.
In what sense?
Well, how do you map a book like this out? I mean, how do you take the ideas and then What does it look like visually? What devices did you use? How did you deal with time? Because you talk in the book about the issue of losing track of time. And then I think about writing the book and the challenge of writing a book where time is all askew. So you can't just do a straight linear approach.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Yeah.
and yet it still had this epic quality, but then it loops back on itself. Like,
Yeah.
how do you come to the place of making that make sense to a reader?
Yeah.
How do you get the angles to look at it?
Um, I can
Does
say
that make
it
sense?
occurred in stages.
Okay.
Early on, and I tried writing it straight through, writing it straight. I
Yeah.
thought I was going to tell the story straight when I started, and
Okay.
it didn't work because when I did it that way, I felt like I had, killed the fluttering creature at the core of the thing. It was dead. Whatever aspect of schizophrenia I was trying to capture, it lost it in that process. So early on, I was like, I'm going to have to find a different way to do this. And what I discovered about if you try to write linear versus if you just let that go was that I did what I called following the intensity.
Mm.
I just thought, what is the moment that feels intense inside me right now? And I wrote it. And I just followed. And what intense moment does that lead me to? And I wrote that. And so I sort of did this thing of, hopscotching from the things that when I thought of them, they made me feel big feelings and felt necessary to write down. So a lot of it had to do with what at the moment of writing felt like the thing I had to get on the page. And I just didn't worry about how it was going to all fit together. I just followed the intensity. And that was like it in terms of a technique for like kind of a long time. And then it was really once I had a lot of pages that was I able to be like, what is this adding up to?
Mm-hmm.
Right? Because with each of the chapters kind of focused on a different idea. And I did have a sense that like if I put all of these little pieces together, they'll add up to something. I think
Sure.
you'll start to see the whole landscape, right?
Right.
Um, and then once I was able to start to see the whole landscape, that was when kind of like the overarching concepts that tied the whole thing together came to me. I mean, they
Wow.
just sort of became apparent at a certain point. Um,
How do you like, for me, I have to make things visual. I think a lot of people are like that probably. I don't think
mm,
I'm unique in that, but I have to draw something. I need boxes and lines. I need to make sense of it that way. So, did you keep note cards? You're off jogging and you're like, "Oh, I have this thought," and stop with your phone and record something. Like, how do you capture in that moment before you lose
okay.
it?
Before I answer that, I just want to comment on the fact that as we've been discussing both you and I have been gesturing broadly with our hands, like making this
Yes.
visual as we talk
Of
about it
course.
right
Yes. Yes. I mean, how else could we communicate, right?
now. I mean, I think I kind of, it was sort of an all of the above approach. I always have a pen and a little tiny journal with me
Okay.
to jot down anything that I feel like I need to jot down. Often my morning walks, I would walk every morning with my dog, and that sort of repetitive movement, it gets the juices flowing in your mind. And then I never had my journal with me, but I had my phone. So I would like basically text things to myself. And
Yeah.
then when I got home, they would be on my laptop and I would copy them down onto a big piece of paper, or a big Word doc, whatever.
Sure.
Um, Once the book was like hundreds of pages and I was trying to figure out the structure, I did different things. I guess within individual chapters, I'll start with that. If I was like, if I was doing sort of a collage and like braiding multiple things together, I would print it out and then I would take colored highlighter pens and like draw little rectangles around different segments, like yellow for theme 1, pink for theme 2, green for theme 3. And then I could put it on the floor and then watch the way the different threads progress through the piece.
Ooh.
And see by the way the colors, and if the colors were getting too far apart or too close together, I would think about what I could insert there to keep that sort of even flow happening. And then once I had the whole book, I printed out every chapter separately and gave it its own little stack on the floor. And then I was doing like musical chairs with chapters, moving
Yeah.
chapters around and, like scanning them. I mean, I had the entire book memorized on some level at that point.
Oh yeah.
Like if I wanted to find a particular page, I could literally think of what is a word that is on that page, but not any other pages in the book.
Mm-hmm.
And I would do a search in the Word document for that word in order to get to that page. Like that's
Wow.
the level at which the whole thing was in my head for a while.
Wow.
And so at that point, I could just skim the chapters and then think about, the big picture of how this one needs to lead into this one, and that has to come before this one. And I mean, and that took a while. That was a couple of weeks of like moving things around and adding and subtracting and, inserting stuff before I felt like I had it. And of course, then, at that point you have your editor. And so my editor was reading the different versions there at the end and offering her suggestions about, I think this needs to go here in order for this to work later. So having another intelligent, brilliant mind working on it and telling me what she thought about how it was working, that was huge, of course, as well.
How did you get an editor that worked well with you, like especially this kind of material? It seems like you'd have to have the right kind of editor.
You do, but the way it works is basically they pick you. Like, so I had an agent. When you have an agent, you send a proposal. You work with your agent to put together the proposal, which has a lot of like sample material. The book was 2/3 written by the time I did this.
By the time, yeah.
So they were not going to be confused about what I was doing at this point.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then it's really like, well, if they like what I'm doing,
sure.
Then, and so she's, the agent sends it out to a dozen different publishers, and then the ones that are interested bid on it, and eventually, I'd talk to a couple prospective editors on the phone to, discussing your ideas about what the book should be, what it could be, what you want it to be, to see if you're on the same page, if you like their ideas, if they like yours. And so they really self-select. This editor, she liked my work, she liked what I was doing and how I was doing it, and she just wanted to help me do it better. So like, you can't ask for anything better than that.
No, that's pretty much as good as it gets. Yeah.
Yeah, pretty much. I feel incredibly lucky about that.
You must have developed quite a relationship with your editor over this process.
Oh yeah, definitely. And I think, it's a professional relationship, and sometimes you connect with people on a personal level and sometimes you don't, and it doesn't necessarily matter, but
right.
I think, but I did connect with my editor on a personal level. I think, we did have a lot in common, and I think, the manuscript was the thing that sort of like helped us find each other.
Exactly.
So it worked really well. Yeah.
Wow. Oh my goodness. Well, I do hope you get to talk about how you wrote this book with somebody who's more an expert in writing than me. Because I don't even know the term, and I feel like I experienced sort of the making of a masterpiece or something that took a lot of skill, but I don't know what you would call the devices that you used, and the writing devices. So you definitely deserve to have that conversation. I'm imagining you in New York in a cafe after the pandemic.
Yeah, hopefully. Well, I'm sure at some point that might happen, and that would be wonderful. But this is a fantastic conversation too. I know you well enough to, you really zeroed in on the really human aspects of the story, and that was really nice. And I think that's the first time someone has come at it from that angle quite so much. And so I really appreciate getting to talk about it in that way with you.
Oh, wow. That means a lot to me, actually.
That was very true.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I actually really went back and looked over the stuff that I highlighted and tried to figure out, well, why did I highlight that? I have a storytelling expert in my life, multiple storytelling experts in my life, but one of them is a comedian from England, and we've been working on a project together recently, and some of the brainstorming exercises that she has me do, she's like, you don't have to worry about why your brain picked that out. When you get 5 minutes to brainstorm stuff, you just put everything down that comes to mind. It doesn't matter. Don't try and because your brain came up with a reason. And I've known this sort of topically, yeah, okay, brainstorming is, don't rule things out, but it was sort of another level of, no, really, don't rule anything out. Like,
Yeah, I think that's a
there isn't
huge
any garbage at
piece of
all.
creative process. Yeah. Yeah. And definitely I went through a process where I had to learn to trust that. Um,
Right.
and I kind of learned it the hard way. I would write something the way it came out the first time, and then I would come back to it later and be like, oh, I need to fix this, and then I would try to do what my conscious mind thought I should do with it. And then later I'd look at both versions and realize the first version was way better, and then
Oh
I
my
just sort
God.
of massacred it. And so, yeah, and I think with my memory too, I've sort of learned, this is the way memory works, like when you go deep into your memories, it's just like a web and everything's connected to everything else and it leads you in all these different directions. And if you don't know why the two things are connected at the moment that you're writing it, that doesn't matter. They are connected.
Yeah.
Otherwise, it wouldn't be happening in your brain that you're putting them together on the page. So a lot of my process was kind of like this backwards thing of like, put them together on the page just because that's what you're doing, and then later figure out why you did it and say something about that.
Yes.
Yeah.
It's almost like the title. We were talking about making a title. So you talked about the lists you were making. I was like, oh, well, that wouldn't work. And then the reason why I knew that wouldn't work is because every time I find myself in a situation where I'm writing out taglines, names of a company, whatever it's been, whatever creative a title for anything, and I'm like writing out lists of them, it never comes from that. For me, never.
Right. Yeah.
Never. It's always this thing where it just like got crapped out in a moment. Like you're like, oh, look at that fragment. Oh, that's
it.
that. And then it's like, whoa. Or through someone else's eyes, or in some often it involves another person or people, of just kind of shooting the shit. You're throwing stuff around and it's like, oh, look at that thing that fell out of my pocket. Oh, wait a minute. That's a diamond.
Exactly. Yeah. And it kind of reminds me of like, I think maybe everyone's had this experience of like, of having a dream that you like have no idea what it means, and then you tell it to your best friend and they immediately know exactly what it's about. And they're just like, well, obviously that's about blah blah blah. And it's like, as soon as you hear it, you're like, of course it is, but like somehow you couldn't figure that out on your own.
It's completely true. Like you have to trick your brain into not trying.
Yeah, it's interesting.
And I think
so, a lot of my process, is how do I access that and how do I get out of its way?
Totally.
Yeah.
That's why I was sort of curious, like what you do to relax or get your mind free and like exercise your brain in a way that relaxes it, because I can imagine like the problem of overthinking.
Yeah. Well, one thing I do, the main thing I do actually, is I write when I first wake up.
Oh,
I write in the morning before I'm fully awake.
Yeah.
And I'm not currently writing every day because I have too much other stuff going on, but I go through periods of months where every morning I wake up, I get the cup of coffee, I sit down at the computer, my husband's still asleep.
Yeah.
The dog is still asleep.
Yeah.
And I start putting the words out, and there's nothing else in my brain because the yesterday has been erased by the sleep and today hasn't gotten absorbed.
Hasn't even started yet. Yeah.
And the other thing too is walking. Like I was saying,
walking.
I would go on these walks and I would get all these ideas while walking. And I think it's that same thing. That's like the real relaxation thing, I think. And movement. There's something about that flow.
No, there is. And it's, well, part of it, I think, is just oxygen to the brain. I mean,
yeah, I'm sure that's
scientifically,
true.
I mean, we know that the more oxygen you get in your brain, the more creative things you can do. And it's funny. I used to, beat myself up for, oh, I'm going to go take a walk in the middle of the day. Now I do it pretty regularly, because because that's where I get my work done.
Yeah.
If I could sit here for 3 hours and make freaking lists, or I could go on an hour walk and suddenly everything's prioritized. I come back and okay, boom, 30 minutes later I'm done. I'm like, now what am I going to do?
Right. Yeah.
So, well, Santa Fe. Santa Fe is a great place to walk. I missed what you just said. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to.
Oh, I said it takes the pressure off too. Like you're on a walk, you're already doing something.
That's
So you
right.
don't have the feeling of I have to accomplish something now because you're already accomplishing something.
Okay.
And if the ideas come, that's just like icing, you know?
So
Yeah.
this is the other thing that has been blowing my mind lately
What's that?
is the ability to make connections from things that you wouldn't have in your conscious mind have put together. But if I want to be creative, I need to be doing things that are unusual, reading new things that are, don't just stick to one kind of reading. Like if you like nonfiction, great. If you like biographies, great, whatever. But don't just read that, read a little bit of fantasy, read a little bit about this or that. I admit I don't read a whole lot of fantasy, but I feel like if I did, I'd probably benefit from it just because, even on a walk, like I'll see a flower and be like, oh, that reminds me of this other thing and this other thing and this other thing. And it's like, I don't know what it is, but it feels like it's like exercise for the creative part of your mind that exposing yourself to different senses, concepts, people, situations.
Definitely.
It unlocks something.
Absolutely. And for me, it's reading different kinds of things is hugely important.
It's huge.
Hugely important. And just reading in general, like not even, going out of my way to read something that's out of the ordinary for me, but like everything offers something new, and I will say, I read a lot of, or I was in the past, less now, but when I was writing this book, especially, I was reading a lot of just like long form journalism, like, the New Yorker and the Atlantic and Harper's. And, because those are shorter pieces, not book length stuff, just a lot of articles,
right.
You get this influx of like a few ideas, and then you move on to the next one. So there was an enormous variety in the kinds of things I was reading at that time, which I think really fed the creative process, and how the book is, just how many different pieces of things are in the book. I don't think I could have done that if I hadn't been taking in so many different pieces of things.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. You don't even realize how your brain is using it. That's the thing.
Yeah.
You don't even necessarily know. And then some diamond will come, you'll cough up a diamond and be like, where'd that come from? Like, I just passed a kidney stone and it's a diamond,
Right.
Yeah. Oh man. Well, this was a blast.
It was. Thank you so much.
Awesome. Did you learn anything about yourself or about anything? I'm just curious.
In the last,
you can say no.
Hours of talking
in the last hour and a half, yeah.
I learned that you have great taste in eyewear.
Oh, well. It's superficial yet satisfying.
No, that's a good question. I'm sure I have learned something, but I think it's the kind of thing where like I'll be able to tell you that tomorrow after I've like walked away from this and it's all sort of like percolated out and I've slept on it. And I'll tell you what I wake up thinking in the morning. Like I think that's how it works for me. I will have distilled it to the thing that really like, that I most needed to hear or to think about, that I'll be aware of it tomorrow.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, the eyewear was enough.
Okay.
I'm so vain. I spend a lot of time thinking about eyewear, so it means a lot to me.
Well, after spending an hour and a half looking at those really cool glasses, that's what was in my head.
I believe in Tom Ford. I think if you're going to buy eyewear and you're a man, you should buy Tom Ford. That's what I think.
I'll remember that. I'll remember that next time my husband needs to buy glasses.
You feel better. You look better. They're high quality. They're worth every penny.
Excellent. Good to know.
Tom Ford, you need to reach out to me and sponsor this program. Well, I can say I learn every time there's something about doing these that I didn't realize in the beginning when I started doing a podcast, which was, it almost didn't matter if I never intended on making a commercial enterprise necessarily. Who knows what will happen with it in the future. But just the whole setup of it, with intention, we're going to come together and talk about something that always delights me with unexpected learning. And I agree, you don't realize it necessarily in the moment. but I have been looking forward to this with increasing glee as it got closer and closer. And I went through that whole creative phase where I was like, oh, I don't know if I'm going to, how do I make this interesting and not conversational and whatever. But then I just went back to my notes in the book, and then I just started organizing them and thinking about what was interesting to me about it. And then you go through the insecurity of like, well, what if I miss the point? What if this isn't what she thinks is interesting? And it's like, well, yeah, then you talk about it, it's like, so anyway, well, it's been a joy. I realized today that it was 27 years. I think I've said that before, but
I don't think I realized that it had been quite that long. That's really amazing.
1993.
Yes, babies.
My friend. Babies.
Yeah.
And I'm just so grateful to have as an Army brat too, moving my whole childhood. I remember it feels like yesterday when I was like, well, I don't have any longtime friends, everybody's short term. And now I have friends in my life that I've known for almost 30 years. It's like, wow, it still blows my mind. So I want to come to Santa Fe.
I mean, I didn't move around a lot as a kid, but I have as an adult. And I think I'm always kind of amazed at the staying power of the great friendships that I formed in college.
Yeah.
With you and Curran and Tasha and Farhood, like that the bonds that we had were very real, our connection was very real and just totally sustainable. And that's really wonderful because, we make so many friendships in life that then just fade away. There's not enough meat to them somehow to really hold over time. And it's just wonderful to realize these friendships that I made at that time, they are really lasting. Yeah.
I'll say this. I knew some of it, but reading the book, one thing, it kind of, in terms of our relationship, it helped me understand why I connected with you at such a deep level.
Oh, that's interesting.
Because while it's different circumstances, my childhood and my family issues and trauma and different things, and interests, in life, and sort of the love of words and all of that came together. And I realized why I always considered you from the beginning such a person of substance. That I knew that there was a lot there, and I knew I didn't know all of it, but you are such a substantive human being and a thoughtful human being. And then you have all these other gifts on top of it. That, it makes more sense to me now. I was like, well, of course, I'm drawn to that. I'm drawn to people who have, I don't know.
I could say exactly the same thing about you. What I think is interesting is that when you're 18, you don't get that.
No.
Like I didn't understand that the reasons that I loved the friends I had were these reasons. And it's only in hindsight that I'm like, God, I was so lucky that I met these people that had these qualities, and I didn't even register it at the time. I didn't know what I had,
But the friendships are a reflection of you.
Oh, that's very kind. I guess there's truth in that too.
No, that's true. And sort of acknowledging that about yourself, that wait a minute, these people, I mean, this is a whole other, but for years, like my own sense of self-worth and self and whatever, it's like, wait a minute, Matt, you have these incredible human beings in your life. Part of that is because you are lovable. You are worthy. You are actually,
they value you because there are things about you that are very valuable. Yeah.
That it has nothing to do with your, whether or not you're successful in this or that, or you look a certain way or whatever. It's truly your being as a soul on this earth is what they love.
Yeah.
And that has been the hardest thing to embrace.
I mean, and I guess I feel like I'm like feeling all like bashful about it too.
Yeah.
But that's a really beautiful point.